The sky that a person sees above them every single day feels ordinary, almost self-evident, something so familiar that we rarely stop to truly think about it. We look at the clouds, we watch the movement of the sun, we witness the sunrise and the sunset, and yet we almost never consider that Scripture speaks about the heavens in a much deeper way than what we usually understand in everyday language. Because for the Bible, the sky is not just the space above the earth, and not simply a distant height that creates a sense of beauty or awe. It becomes a language of revelation, a sign of order, a place of testimony, and an image of a reality that goes far beyond everything the human eye is capable of seeing. And that is exactly why the biblical teaching about the heavens is not limited to a single layer. Instead, it reveals a multidimensional picture of the world where the visible is connected to the invisible, and the material is intertwined with the spiritual. And from the earliest times, the human gaze has always been drawn upward, not simply out of curiosity, but because deep within the human soul, there has always been a sense that above the earthly world, there is something more than clouds and stars. The greatness of the heavens has always awakened not only interest, but also a deep inner awe, as if the universe itself silently speaks about a reality beyond what can be perceived by the senses. And the Bible confirms this intuitive feeling, but then goes even further, showing that the heavens are not a passive background to human life, but rather a medium through which God reveals the order of creation, reminds us of His authority, testifies to His glory, and points humanity toward its place within a greater divine purpose. And when the psalmist says that the heavens declare the glory of God, he is not speaking only about their outward beauty, but about a continuous and unceasing testimony. Because every new day, every clear night, every movement of the celestial bodies and every change of the seasons points to the fact that the world is not random, that everything that exists speaks of a creator. And when a person learns to truly observe, they begin to understand that the sky is not just a part of nature, but one of the greatest signs that the universe has an author, a structure, and a purpose. And it is from this realization that the journey into understanding the three heavens truly begins. One of the most powerful statements in the entire Bible appears in the very first line of the book of Genesis. And in these words, we are not simply given the beginning of a story, but the foundation for an entire worldview that will later unfold through the law, the prophets, the Psalms, and the gospel. Because when Scripture says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth," it immediately establishes several profound truths. First of all, revealing God as the source of everything that exists, meaning that the world did not come into being by itself, it was not the result of blind chance, and it was not part of an eternal cycle where matter has always existed. Instead, everything that exists has its beginning in God. And this beginning is not part of a repeating process, but something unique and absolute. Because before this moment, nothing that we call the universe existed. There was no space in the way we understand it, no flow of time, no formed world waiting to be organized. Everything begins to exist because God wills it to exist. And that is what makes this opening statement so powerful, because it does not explain the origin of the world as a random process, but introduces a personal creator who acts intentionally, freely, and with authority. And the idea of creation out of nothing becomes central here, because God does not take pre-existing material and simply reshape it. He calls into existence what did not exist before, something that goes far beyond human experience. Since everything humans do involves transforming what already exists, we build, we combine, we modify, but we do not create being out of non-being. Yet God is presented as the one who possesses exactly this power. And from the very beginning, the Bible establishes a clear distinction between the Creator and creation. The world is vast, but it is not divine. Nature is beautiful, but it is not self-originating. The heavens are majestic, but they are not the ultimate power. Everything that exists is secondary to God. And this statement challenges many perspectives that have appeared throughout history. It opposes the idea that reality is confined only to matter. It rejects the belief that nature is eternal and self-sufficient, and it leaves no room for the idea that everything that happens is without meaning. Instead, the Bible introduces a world of intention, where God speaks, separates, names, blesses, and establishes order, showing that the world is not uncontrolled, but exists under the authority of the one who gave it structure from the very beginning. And although scientific research can explain many processes within the universe, its structure, the movement of matter, the formation of stars, and the development of life, it does not provide a final answer to the question of ultimate origin, meaning, and purpose. And this is where Scripture does something that empirical knowledge cannot do. It reveals not just the mechanism of reality, but its source. And that is why the biblical discussion about the heavens begins not with observation of the cosmos, but with revelation about the Creator. The first heaven in the biblical understanding is connected to what a person sees every single day. It is the visible sky, the atmospheric expanse, the space of air, clouds, winds, rain, and the flight of birds. And it appears in the book of Genesis as part of the ordering of the world on the second day of creation, when God creates the firmament and separates the waters. And in the ancient text, this is not described as a dry explanation of a natural process, but as an act of bringing order out of chaos, where structure replaces disorder and a life-supporting environment emerges where none existed before. And this first heaven is important not only because it provides the physical conditions necessary for life, but because it reveals something about the nature of God, showing him as not only a creator, but also one who prepares and sustains. Because before filling the earth with living beings, he first establishes order, division, and sequence, shaping the world like a home where everything has its place. And this already shows that biblical creation is not comparable to a random explosion of meaningless forces, but rather a deliberate and structured act. And even though modern science can describe the atmosphere in terms of layers, chemical composition, pressure, air movement, and climate systems, this detailed knowledge does not cancel the deeper meaning presented in Scripture, because in the biblical view, the atmosphere is not merely a mechanical system, but a part of creation that is continuously sustained by God, where rain, wind, clouds, and the changing of temperature are expressions of his care, not isolated phenomena existing independently, but elements included within his governance of the world. And this is why the Psalms describe God as one who rides on the wings of the wind and makes the clouds his chariot, not as primitive imagery replacing observation, but as a theological statement that nature itself is not abandoned after creation, but remains under divine action, where the winds move according to natural laws yet still exist under the authority of their creator, where the rain does not simply fall, but becomes part of a sustaining order, without which life on earth would not be possible. And through the sun and rain, God sustains all living things, which is why Christ says that the Father sends rain on both the righteous and the unrighteous, and causes the sun to rise on both the good and the evil, meaning that the visible sky becomes a channel of universal grace extended to the entire world. And every breath a person takes, every ray of light, every harvest, every changing season is not random, but a constant reminder that life is not sustained by nature alone, but by divine care. And yet the first heaven is not only about physical existence, but also about deep spiritual meaning, because it is under this sky that human life unfolds, where a person experiences the quiet of a clear day and the tension of an approaching storm, feels the wind, watches the clouds gather, and all of this becomes part of an inner experience. And if a person is attentive, they begin to see nature not just as an external environment, but as a testimony of the Creator. Because the heavens do not speak with loud words, but through consistency, rhythm, and harmony. And this is why the first heaven can be understood as a school of daily revelation, not overwhelming a person with sudden mystical visions, but quietly and continuously reminding them of God through ordinary things like the sunrise, the shadow of clouds, the sound of rain, and the movement of birds high above, all of which become part of a greater narrative of creation that never stops pointing back to its Creator. And when a person begins to see this, their entire perception of the world changes, and what once felt ordinary is no longer empty, but filled with meaning. If the first heaven is connected to the atmosphere and the everyday experience of human life, then the second heaven opens up an entirely different perspective, revealing the vast expanse of space, the realm of stars, planets, the sun, and the moon. a depth so immense that it awakens a unique sense of awe, because in its presence a person becomes deeply aware of their own limitations. And it is here that Scripture speaks about the heavenly bodies as signs for seasons, days, and years, emphasizing that their movement is not chaotic but ordered, placed within a structured system that reflects intention rather than randomness. And the cosmos is not presented as a meaningless void, but as a carefully arranged creation under the authority of the Creator. And the second heaven reminds humanity that reality is far greater than personal experience, greater than earthly concerns, and greater than any human construction. Because when a person looks into the night sky, they are confronted with a scale that makes ordinary ideas of importance fade away. And yet the Bible does not leave them in fear before an impersonal infinity. Instead, it declares that this vast universe is still God's creation, that the stars are not independent rulers, they do not determine destiny on their own, and they are not objects of worship, but rather they serve the one who placed them in their positions, which is why Scripture strongly rejects any form of idolization of celestial bodies, affirming that while the sun, moon, and stars are majestic, they are not divine, but part of a greater order governed by one Creator. And through the second heaven, the theme of order becomes even more evident, as the movement of time, the repetition of seasons, and the consistency of cosmic rhythms all testify to an underlying design, showing that God did not simply create the universe once and abandon it, but established a system in which everything operates according to measure and purpose. And yet the biblical vision of the second heaven goes beyond astronomical grandeur, because in certain passages the heavenly realm is also connected to an unseen spiritual reality, most clearly expressed in the words of the Apostle Paul, who speaks about a struggle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. And here the second heaven gains an additional dimension, becoming not only the realm of celestial bodies, but also a domain where invisible conflict unfolds, not implying that the physical sky is literally identical to the spiritual realm, but revealing that reality is deeper than what can be perceived through natural observation alone. And Scripture shows that history includes not only visible events, but also an unseen struggle, as seen in the book of Daniel, where a heavenly messenger speaks of opposition from spiritual forces connected to earthly kingdoms, suggesting that behind human events there may exist influences that are not directly visible yet still shape outcomes. And this introduces the idea of spiritual warfare, a reality that does not remove human freedom but surrounds it with tension and depth, emphasizing that the world cannot be reduced to purely material explanations, because not everything that affects human life can be measured or expressed through formulas. And there exists an unseen realm where forces of light and darkness, truth and deception, faithfulness and rebellion are at work. And in this context, the heavens are no longer just a magnificent structure of the universe, but a stage where the depth of spiritual history is revealed. And yet the central message of the biblical understanding of the second heaven is not fear of the unseen, but confidence in the supreme authority of God. Because even in the presence of opposition, God remains sovereign. No darkness can equal His power. No evil exists as an independent eternal force. Everything ultimately falls under His judgment. And for this reason, the theme of spiritual struggle in Scripture is always accompanied not by panic, but by a call to vigilance, clarity, and faith. Because the world is deep, the unseen conflict is real, but at no level of creation does God ever lose control. Beyond the visible sky and beyond the vastness of cosmic space, Scripture speaks about a reality that no longer belongs to the material world. This is the third heaven, the realm of God's presence, His throne, His glory, and the final fulfillment of hope. And when the Apostle Paul refers to a man who was caught up to the third heaven, he describes an experience that goes far beyond ordinary human perception. Because here the discussion is no longer about a space that can be seen with the eyes, but about a spiritual reality that transcends all earthly forms of understanding. And the third heaven cannot be interpreted as simply a distant location somewhere within the universe. The Bible does not present it in that way. It is not a geographical point or a region that can be reached through technological means, but rather a dimension of divine glory, a fullness of presence where God's holiness is revealed without any veil. And it is in this realm that prophetic visions describe the throne of God, angelic worship, an indescribable radiance, and absolute divine authority. Where prophets like Isaiah see the Lord seated on a high and exalted throne, where Ezekiel experiences visions filled with fire, light, movement, and overwhelming glory that surpass human imagery, and where the Apostle John in the book of Revelation sees heaven opened, the throne revealed, and all of creation directed toward worship. And in all of these portrayals, the third heaven appears as a reality where there is no chaos, no doubt, no separation between God and His glory. Everything is filled with His presence. And for the Christian understanding, this realm is not only a description of where God dwells, but also the ultimate hope toward which the story of salvation is moving. Because through Christ, humanity is given not only knowledge about heaven, but also a path toward it, which is why the New Testament speaks about the Father's house, a prepared place, citizenship in heaven, and a future transformation, making the third heaven not an abstract theological concept, but a real destination connected to redemption. And within this reality, everything associated with decay, pain, death, and separation is removed, which is why the image of the New Jerusalem descending from heaven is so powerful, because it does not represent an escape from creation, but its ultimate restoration, showing that God does not abandon the world and simply take people away from it, but brings history to its fulfillment where everything corrupted by sin is renewed. And for this reason, the third heaven cannot be understood only as a distant realm. It is also the language of God's final victory, the fullness of life, and the perfect union between the Creator and the redeemed, revealing that the ultimate destiny of human existence is not emptiness or disappearance, but restoration, presence, and completion in God. When people today think about the heavens, they often immediately imagine outer space, astrophysics, telescopes, and scientific discoveries. And it is true that science has given humanity an incredible amount of knowledge about the visible universe. We understand far more about the structure of the atmosphere, the movement of planets, the formation of stars, and the scale of galaxies than people in ancient times ever could. But even with all this knowledge, it is important to recognize that science and scripture speak about reality in different ways and address different levels of questions, because scientific inquiry focuses on what can be observed, measured, tested, and verified. It explains mechanisms, describes processes, and helps us understand how the universe functions. And this is valuable and important, but it does not provide a final answer to the deeper questions of meaning, purpose, and ultimate origin. It can explain how celestial bodies move, but it cannot by itself explain why the universe exists or why the human heart longs for eternity. And this is where Revelation enters. Because the biblical teaching about the three heavens does not contradict science within its proper domain, but goes beyond it. It does not deny the observable universe, but places it within a larger framework of meaning, where the visible sky becomes an object of study. The cosmos becomes a field of scientific exploration, but the spiritual dimension remains beyond the reach of instruments. And this does not make it less real. It simply shows the limits of empirical knowledge, and for this reason, faith and science are not required to be enemies. They operate on different levels. Science helps us understand the structure of creation, while faith helps us understand its source, its meaning, and its final purpose. And when these two are not confused or forced to replace one another, there is no true contradiction between them, but rather a deeper harmony where the study of the universe can actually increase our sense of wonder toward the Creator. And Revelation helps us not lose meaning in the midst of endless facts, reminding us that knowledge without purpose remains incomplete. When a person begins to reflect on the three heavens, their perspective changes not only about the world around them, but also about themselves, because the first heaven reminds them of God's constant care in everyday life. The second heaven reveals the vastness of creation and the reality of an unseen struggle. And the third heaven points toward the glory that the story of salvation is moving toward, where human life finds its ultimate fulfillment. And together, these three dimensions form a complete and unified picture of reality, showing that human existence is not confined within a closed material system, but takes place in a world where the visible constantly points to the invisible and where the temporary touches the eternal. And this is why the biblical teaching about the heavens is not an abstract idea or distant speculation, but something that has direct meaning for the inner life of a person, because it calls them not to be trapped within the limits of the earthly perspective, but to recognize that above everyday life there is meaning, above history there is judgment, above chaos there is order, and above fear there is hope. And when a person truly understands this, their view of life becomes deeper. They no longer see existence as a random movement between birth and death, but as part of a greater story, and the heavens themselves are no longer just a beautiful image or a poetic concept. They become a constant call where the first heaven says that God is near and sustains life. The second heaven says that reality is deeper than it appears and calls for spiritual awareness. And the third heaven declares that there is a fullness beyond this world to which humanity is called. And this perspective does not separate a person from the world, but gives them the right place within it, teaching them to live on earth while looking upward, understanding that the heavens are not simply a height above the ground, but a living testimony about God, His order, His authority, and His eternal reality. And the more deeply we look into this revelation, the more clearly we understand that the sky is not just part of the landscape, it is a sign of the Creator.